Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
All right, let's talk about the articles. Andrew, could you pull them up? So we had John Piper wrote an article, which I'll get the title up, Policies, Persons, and Paths to Ruin. That came out on October the 22nd. And then I think it was October the 26th. Maybe I have this date wrong. Wayne Grudem wrote a response to John Piper's article. And is there a date on there, Andrew? October the 27th. Yep.
Pretty close.
And then I think it was Wayne Grudem wrote the response to Piper. It says the title was A Respectful Response to My Friend John Piper About Voting for Trump. It's just so great. I love when these guys kind of have a viewpoint and then someone else has a viewpoint. I just love that. And then Albert Mohler had an article that came out. I think that one was on the 26th, which was kind of in between there, but it wasn't a response to either one. And so what are your thoughts? I thought that, first of all, I'm really glad that each of these three guys wrote those articles. I found it helpful. I found each of them to be well reasoned. I mean, what do you expect, from Piper and Grudem and Mohler?
All three of whom have been extremely influential in my own life,
really,
in my parents' life, in my wife's life.
Yeah,
to put that marker down. All three of them. Yes.
Yep. I mean, most the same for me, even though I'm more familiar with Piper and Grudem.
Sure.
I have, as I read through them, it was informational for me. It was instructive to me. It was encouraging. I mean, and I have kind of my own thoughts on it a little bit. And I will say, these guys, all three of these guys are they're so far advanced from me by age and experience and theological robustness and the ability to rationalize and conceptualize and put thoughts on paper. So it's I even sort of feel bad even having any thoughts on these because these guys are I look up to them so much, but I'd love to get your thoughts. So we had the Piper article that came out first. We can kind of touch on that one. And then Grudem's response. I'd love to hear what your thoughts were.
Yeah. So like you, I respect all three. I only know one of them personally. I'm not going to say who. And so I agree with, I think maybe one of the most important paragraphs, especially in Grudem's stuff, and maybe across all of them, is one of Grudem's closing paragraphs. Finally, just as John Piper in his article modeled respect for those who have another position, so I also respect him for the courage and clarity of his convictions and for his characteristic willingness to advocate a potentially unpopular position because he thinks it is right. Mm-hmm. I hope that in what I have written here, I have modeled a way to disagree with a friend graciously and in a way that will not damage our friendship in the future. Mm-hmm. He continues with a P.S., Grudem speaking again. After I finished writing this article, I sent it to John for any comments. He replied that I had represented him fairly, which we as Christians often do not do when discussing politics, as an aside. And Piper assured Grudem that, quote, he counted me as a dear friend. He also pointed out how I could make one of my arguments stronger.
Yeah, I love that.
That, I think, only someone with a strong confidence in the sovereignty of God over all history would do that in the midst of a serious disagreement about the future of the nation. I think those are the two most important paragraphs of all of this.
Yes.
Okay. Done. That's my comment.
Let me say this about Piper's article, though, which I so appreciated. And it's just so Piper. Piper has this way of, when you read his stuff or you listen to a sermon, he just has this way of drawing your heart towards Christ. I mean, that's just, he just has a knack for that. And here's this article, most of which I totally agree with and some of which I have some questions about, but still, when you read the article, you come away from this with a being drawn towards Christ, basically, which I just so admire that with John Piper's ability. And I think it just comes out of his own passion for Christ.
Yeah, I agree. Piper's always pressing that direction. I appreciate the disagreeing graciously in public. I do notice an asymmetry particularly between Grudem and Piper in, say, word count. So this is not the first pro-Trump document that Grudem has placed.
Oh, okay.
This is the latest in a series, basically.
Interesting.
World Magazine published a case for, case against Donald Trump several weeks back. Grudem was the case for, and David French was the case against. It wasn't an article, it wasn't an op-ed. It was an interview by Marvin Olasky, editor-in-chief of World, with each of them. It was a printed interview.
It was a printed interview.
Yeah.
And after this, you need to send me that link because I'd love to see that. Because David French is someone I follow a lot too, and he's pretty vocal about his anti-Trumpness.
Yeah. So the affirmation of Trump. All it's to say, like, Piper didn't start all this. We've now come through 3 or 4 years now of evangelicals arguing over Trump, either for or against. So Piper's not speaking into a vacuum, but I take him at his word, where he says he's offering his thoughts for a case or some arguments that he doesn't see being lifted up or being amplified, and he felt compelled to do that. I think that's a great reason to engage the public squares when you see that something that you believe in or want to see enunciated is not being enunciated by someone else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want to amplify that or contribute to the conversation. And sometimes, frankly, it takes someone with relatively equal credentials to someone compared to, say, Mueller or Wayne Grudem, right? I mean, I could weigh in with thoughts similar to Piper. Who cares?
Sure.
But John Piper, right? And so I appreciate his willingness to respectfully challenge some of the other thinking that's going on from people who he considers friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who clearly agree on really important issues about the gospel and about theology, even down to tertiary issues. They're in lockstep in so many things, right? And so I appreciate his willingness to do that. Kind of lost my train of thought.
Well, you were coming back around to the asymmetry of word count.
So if you look at Grudem's response to Piper, it's a lot lengthier than Piper's one-off.
Sure.
This is the only thing Piper has published is like 7 or 8. I didn't do the word count, but like 700 or 800 word op-ed, right?
Yep.
Grudem goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, he does.
And this is not the first, even this year. In 2016, let's remember, he endorsed President Trump before he rescinded his endorsement of President Trump, before he re-endorsed President Trump in a matter of a few weeks. That concerned me.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a situation where, look, Grudem includes a lot of good points in his arguments, but sometimes arguments are made stronger by leaving out the weaker arguments, and he includes arguments that I think are weak. I think the weaker arguments are, I think he has a little too much confidence in what the Trump administration has done for social conservative issues that I, as a insider, for lack of a better word, saw up close and personal, and say, look, it's behind the curtain. It's not all what you see.
Yep.
And actually, I could point to 3 or 4 significant legislative losses that the Trump administration, the White House, participated in to sink. That would have been that on issues that Grudem speaks to, particularly like, well, we'll set that aside.
Yeah.
We'll go too in the weeds. So I think Grudem makes some assumptions about how good it is.
Sure.
In some cases. Supreme Court justice is certainly really good. HHS thing's really good. There's just some other issues that it's not as robust a case as I think he thinks it is. And what kind of frustrates me about Grudem and some other folks is they haven't rescinded their earlier remarks in, say, like 98 around Bill Clinton, or even early 2000s around President Bush's oppositions, John Kerry, and who was the other guy in the primaries who lost out?
Not Gore.
Not Gore. Anyway, that character is a big issue. And so you got a couple paragraphs from Grudem in '98 about the Clinton stuff and how important character was for national leaders. And then now he, in this piece, downplays that pretty significantly. And I don't see, maybe he's done it and I haven't seen it. That's possible. But I haven't seen like a direct explanation of that move.
Yep.
Right. And I can cite an example in Christian circles of the rhetoric move in polling. We flipped from 2011 to 2016. When asked if an elected official's character matters for public office, in 2011, it was something over 70 percentile. 71, 72%, 70% of us said, yes, it's important. In 2016, we completely reversed our answers and 72% of us said, no, it doesn't. In a matter of 6 years.
Who was polled? Evangelical Christians or no? Just America?
This is evangelical Christians, and this polling was done
It is
by,
evangelical Christians that were polled, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
White evangelicals were polled.
Interesting.
And I think this was either Barna, I'll find it here in a minute. It was either Barna or Lifeway. So it's not like a polling group outside of our tribe. These are people who actually think you're actually an evangelical instead of some kind of like, you've been to church sometime in your life and you happen to be white and you're an evangelical. You claim a Christian. Like these polling groups actually care. And so that.
And just to be clear, they're going after a very particular demographic. You don't have to be white to be evangelical, right?
Right. You don't have to. Right. I mean, this is people. We're people who care about the definition of evangelical.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the polling from secular groups, and you can refer to folks like historians like Thomas Kidd and even Joe Carter at the Gospel Coalition, who've explained why polling on evangelicals is often terrible.
Right.
That's a conversation for another time. But it's often the way they get to you as a quote white evangelical is often not based on doctrine. Right. And often doesn't even include churchgoers. Right. So you've got polling people who are showing up on polls as quote white evangelicals who actually don't attend church on any regular basis. And yet they're rolled up in this white evangelical polling data. The polls I'm mentioning for the sake of this conversation are actual Christian polling organizations, either Barna or Data or Lifeway, who actually have some metrics to questions to gauge belief-wise, conviction-wise, doctrinal-wise, if you're an evangelical. And those qualified evangelicals flipped on that question. And I see a lot of Grudem's position on that as an example of kind of iterating that.
Yes.